Hello everyone, I am Amit Darda, co-founder Modefin. Modefin is a leading digital banking solution provider, and I am your host and moderator for the today's session on addressing the rising risk in mobile banking and internet banking services. I hope you and your families are safe. The current situation of pandemic has brought forward many challenges in terms of personal as well as professional life. During this pandemic, one more thing with the important thing what happened is for all our banking requirements, the channel which came forward and helped us is a mobile and internet, which we always also called as a digital banking. The way the growth we have seen the growth. At the same time, we have also seen there are a lot of risk which has been rising on the same channels. So today we are coming forward and having this panel discussion with all the experts on how we can address this risk. Before we start this session, we have some housekeeping rules. Can we have next slide? So some of the housekeeping rules we will follow during this session. The panel discussion will last for 60 minutes, including question and answer. All the attendees will be on listen only mode. The panel discussion will be for 45 minutes, followed by 15 minutes question and answer. If you have any questions, you can type in the chat window and the questions will be answered during the question and answer session. So let's follow this process. Now, before I introduce our panelist, you must have seen, all the digital services are normally been offered by the banking system, by the banks. And to enable these banks, the core important, the ecosystem member is the technology solution provider. And the way the bank provide these services with the help of technology service provider, the important role is played by the security consultant who will guide banks as well as technology solution companies how they have to secure this solution and what best they have to do for the customers. So today we have the panelists from all the three ecosystems. So the first one what we have is from bank, Ms. Tato. Ms. Tato serves as an IT project manager at Bank ABC, Botswana. She has more than a decade of experience on handling various IT projects. Before joining Bank ABC, she has also worked in couple of big banks in Botswana. She has also executed many IT projects in Bank of Botswana. The second panelist, what we have today with us is Prajwal. Prajwal is a lead consultant from SISA. He has conducted many information audits, security system audits, and is instrumental in securing many of the systems for the banks. Then the next panelist what we have is Mr. Pradeep. So Pradeep is the head of product development and innovation at Modefin. By degree, he is a engineering by profession, and he has done the degree from VTU, Bangalore. Pradeep has more than 15 years of experience in developing various products for banks and financial institutes. So this is where we will complete our introduction to the panelists. So today we have Prajwal, Chacho, and Pradeep from the various systems of the ecosystem of this entire digital services. To start with, I will put okay. So today, if you see, the global scenario is changing from a financial system perspective. Today, the number of transactions are increasing on the digital banking platform. Some of the reports also mention that 96% of the 53% of the population across the globe will have access to the banking transactions on mobile or a digital channel by 2026. With the rise of the financial transactions and the population, at the same time, we have also noticed in a lot of reports that the risk and the cyber attacks are also increasing on this digital platform. One of the report also says that $6 trillion is the amount what we see as a risk on the cyber accounts alone this year. So these are some of the facts what you can see. So today let's discuss on how we can address this various risks associated with the digital banking. To start with, I would like to, quickly ask all our panelists to put their thoughts on what is the future, what they see from a digital banking perspective, and what are the major risks, what they feel from the system. So we can start with Tacho. Tacho, from your experience, from a banking experience, how do you see the, the growth of digital banking services, and what are the risks you feel as a bank are the major risks from this platform? Chacho?
Thank you, Amit. Good morning, everyone. So, to answer your question in brief and short, is the uptake of the digital banking. We've seen it rising over the years, as you rightly mentioned, with the pandemic, with the COVID. Obviously, the traditional banking that normally we are used to, whereby you physically go to a bank and do your transactions, had to stop. And as such, from a regulatory perspective as well, we were requested to ensure that our digital platforms are available to customers at all times, right? So we are seeing a huge shift, a huge uptake to say, I'll sit at the comfort of my home and pay for my bills or pay for my goods and services. So obviously, as the uptake increases, we are going to see a correlation now in terms of people sitting behind their desk now, trying to rip people of that is the malware aspect, the spoofing aspect. And what it means is that as a bank now, we need to put in the measures to try and deter those those people who are trying to rip people off. So from a system perspective, obviously, you will analyze and see how our applications are currently configured, how our systems work, etc. And once you come up with the vulnerability, the remedial action has to take place. And we've over the past months, we've been heavily working on that to remediate such gaps within our environments to make sure that we safeguard our customer data, our customer information and transactions. Thank you.
Thank you, Reto. You have raised, you have mentioned one very good point about the availability, and I think the banking services in the old days were available on the limited time, but with the introduction of this digital channel, we can see we have this banking services 24/7, and you also mentioned about huge uptake. Yes, that's this is what is happening, and this is what we have also noticed in the market. So over to you, Prajwal. What's your thoughts on the future of digital banking from a security consultant perspective, from those eyes, and I know that you see the risk on day-to-day basis. So from your your views, what are the major risks what you foresee?
Absolutely. Thank you, Amit, and a very good morning. So, Amit, I would like to begin with a quote that says, necessity is the mother of all invention, right? Now, that is actually taken a slight turn because of the current pandemic. And, they've actually reworded that particular thing as necessity is the mother of all adoption, which means as of today, if you don't adapt, you die. As simple as that, right?
Okay.
Because of the current pandemic situation coming into the picture. Now, you see, you take the entire country itself. As of today, there were people who actually didn't know how to do a financial transaction online, right? But because of the current pandemic and the travel restrictions per se, and you're homebound at the end of the day, people started using these digital platforms because they didn't have a choice. I mean, people who actually didn't know how to do a financial transaction online, they started doing all of these particular transactions online, and you see the growth. Like, the pandemic started in 2019, and over a period of time, you see like the entire world is actually moved to this particular change. That's what I was saying, you adapt or you die. So trust me, the future of digital banking is looking bright, right? Because why? One is with respect to the cardless payments that is coming to the picture. That is also very important. Now the next thing is people are not actually physically using your card at all. You have digital wallets coming into the picture, right?
Correct.
Automation, all of this is a key. But having said that, like as security analysts, security specialists, consultants, developers, like how we are actually upgrading ourselves, We also know that the hackers are also trying, left, right, and center to exploit systems at the end of the day.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Because that is where they're trying to siphon out, money per se, or looking at the financial perspective of it. Like you take all the domains, right? Among all the domains, the financial sector per se is 300 times more vulnerable. This is out of a research that is basically provided, that the financial sector is a major hit because of the current pandemic situation. Now, coming to the risk perspective of it, now where are these risks? Is first of all, the first major risk is identity theft, right? Because everything is online. So at the end of the day, people are trying to exploit what? Like your passwords and gaining access to your systems. That is something which is very, very important. And that's why we basically say that you safeguard your passwords, you protect your passwords, right? And you basically make sure you use complex passwords and so on and so forth from a risk perspective of it. And having a decade of experience in forensic investigation also, we see that the first thing they try to compromise is the password, because the moment you get access to that, you get access to a system. Correct? So what we try to do is, make sure that these passwords are safe and secure. And the next thing is like what Tato basically just, communicated during her particular time, as well as malware. Now, this is another change. Now, apart from that, also what we need to look into is, one is the security risk, but the other is the organizational risk. Now, people who didn't have this particular digital banking, for them to upgrade, it becomes a challenge. Why? Because innovation is a key. Next, people are not ready for change. Okay, but then you don't have a choice. You need to adapt. You need to change, right? So all of this. So according to me, the risk, from a risk perspective, you have organizational risk, you have security risk, and you need to make sure that you're keeping both in line, because at the end of the day, business is very important, right? And also because business is important, the risk associated with the business should be taken care of. That's pretty much from my end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prajwal. Thank you for highlighting about organizational risk and the exposure which has been increased by 300 times. So I'll go to the Pradeep. So Pradeep, from a solution provider view, right now we have heard about from the banker, we have heard from a security consultant view, but now as a solution provider, what do you feel that how you have noticed the growth of digital banking? And as Prajwal has mentioned, 300 times the risk has been exposed. So what's your comment on that?
Thanks, Amit, and a warm afternoon and a good morning to everyone who has joined the call. Amit, there is a paradigm shift, right? So usually the banks, when they start building the products, they keep services as the centric point or pivot point and build the features, the common solutions around it. Where we see the products are going is customer centric, right?
Okay.
So let's say down the line 1 year or 2 years, there may be a situation wherein the services would be common for each and everyone, right? And they would be sidelined, and only the customer centric, what features we are concentrating on the customers. For example, today we have bill presentment and the loan management as a system, wherein they are giving few suggestions and few opportunities for the customers to have the good feel, right? However, going forward, the customer centric and customer based behavioral banking, right? Based behavioral banking transactions, etc., is where the future would be. One. And other would be the banks will start managing the platform, right? Where they go away from the vendor's dependency, or they have only the minimal vendor dependency. So they should be able to manage the UI components, they should be able to manage the backend, etc., right? And another key thing would be the migration of the products from the banking infrastructure towards the cloud. So most of the banks have already thought through it and started the journey towards it, so that we move at least the core components, right? The digital channels, the mobile and internet, to be hosted in the clouds. So the different cloud players are also coming up with additional security and measures, etc., right? And another one would be the SaaS kind of model, where banks would be more interested on the software as a solution, and also banks would like to become the fintechs by themselves, right? So they should get dedicated arms where they should be able to become a banking as a service, right? So this is where I foresee where the banking industry is headed. And the major risk where we are seeing today is, as Tato mentioned, right, availability is one key factor. So this COVID made us got us a situation wherein after post 6 p.m. no one will be available in the banking what is the bank's premises, right? So there should be a platform, right? So this is where the banks are thinking why we should keep everything within the banking infrastructure where we can't even go and maintain 24/7, right? Why can't we give it to a specialized people, right? So when this paradigm shift is happening, the banks also should understand how the infrastructure would work, how the latest technological products would fit into this infrastructure, right? And also how do we enable the bank staff to understand and train them thoroughly to manage the platform efficiently. So that's where I foresee digital platform.
Thank you, Pradeep. You know what you have mentioned has given me lot of questions, which I definitely want to put forward to this forum on the SaaS and on the services on the cloud. So before we go to the next question, can we have the poll question for the audience to understand few aspects? So we'll have 10 seconds to go for this question. Yeah. Thank you, team. So you must have so now I can relate the question what was been there for the poll, which talks about how often the bank admin team opens the control panel, or how they access the change the password, which I think is in line with what Pradeep was mentioning about the SaaS model and other thing. But I have a question linked on the same thing. Based on your experience, which channel from a digital banking? So when we talk about digital banking, we have internet banking, mobile, various other ATMs, other channels. So which channel you feel has more risk, and the risk is associated, the more risk is from the insiders or from the outsiders? So when we say insiders like our staff, our own, the team who is managing the system, or the hackers who are sitting outside monitoring the system and trying to see a gap and enter into the system. So Chacha, over to you. What's your thoughts on this? So as a bank, you must have seen a lot of such scenarios. So you feel that it is more of an insider or more of an outsider, or it's more of a combination?
Okay, so there are two aspects to it. I think in my experience rolling out digital platforms, we've seen that the most risk will lie with the internet banking one, from an outsider perspective, because that's where you actually expose yourself to the world. So I've seen more work going into ensuring that that link is not hackable. You remediate all the vulnerable issues towards it. That's where I've seen more work go into it. Notwithstanding the fact that yes, the digital app, there is a level of work, but the work that I've seen and the investment that we've seen, normally it's on the internet banking one, right?
Okay.
From an external perspective, and then we've seen more on your phone, right? On the USSD aspect. Obviously, you see the insider aspect, where now you have a conniving setup where you have somebody inside within the organization, somebody at the MNO, where they now start doing the SIM swaps, right? But that's not really predominant. The predominant one would sit on the internet banking. And like I said, the app is there, but then with the app, at least we've got the guidance from the stores, right? From Android and iOS. There's a level of security standard that you need to conform to, as opposed to the internet banking.
Sure.
Thank you.
So thank you, Dato, for highlighting about USSD, because I think USSD channel is more popular in Africa. And when we talk about US or Europe, those market, they are not much aware about USSD. because USSD more as a channel is more popular in Asian countries as well as in the African countries. So thank you, Tato, for bringing that point in front of audience. So before I go to Prajwal, Pradeep, this is for you. So from a security, the channel, right? Which channel?
Okay. I would slightly, what do you say, go against what Tato's points are. With due respect, of course, with due respect, right? See,
that's how the experience is, right?
Yeah. So
from a banker and from a solution provider.
yes. See, the smartphone industry, right, is coming up with a very competitive pricing structure, right? And also the data is reachable for most of the common people are able to buy good amount of data with reasonable price. So what this has done is it has given access to most of the customers. Means if you ask me today, especially in Indian context and African context, right? Even the college goer, so who starts to the education front and etc. Right? They know how the smartphones work, and they have access to it, right?
Correct.
Because if you spend around $50 to $100, you get a decent smartphone which has all those capabilities to do the financial transactions, etc. Which means that the customer base accessing the digital channels are more on the mobile front. So which gives the attackers and the hackers, right, a more opportunity to look into that systems, right? However, being said that, right, if we build apps with proper security measures in place, right? Example, the way the data is transmitted from the apps to the servers, right? So if we encrypt it in the latest format, for latest technologies, and in the proper encryption keys, etc., I think we will safeguard sufficiently on the apps front. And as Tato rightly said, right, and you were also mentioning on the USSD. So USSD is more vulnerable, if you ask me, on the apps, on the mobile banking front. However, there are measures to overcome that. Like example, if a SIM swap, even SIM swap has happened, so we should the bank should insist the MNO to give us the IMSI checks, right? So that we check the the authenticity and what kind of checks we need to keep place, whether the SIM swap happened in last 6 days or last 1 month. We should check and block the financial transaction, etc. Right? So that's one point. And coming to the outsiders versus the insiders, right? From the product perspective, I always go with the insiders, right? Because what we have observed, right? The banks are not having a proper role-based access. Right? So the person who onboards a customer also does the end of the day reconciliation, also has access to the administration console of the digital channels. So basically, he will be having the 360-degree view of what's happening in the plant.
Understood.
So in that case, what would happen is it will be really difficult for the banks to identify the attacks when it happens inside. Whereas if it is outside, right, if the product is secure enough, we can always block such attacks. And also, we have a detailed audit of how it has happened, and we can even stop it from further attacks. However, if it is insider, right, he can write a malware, and as he has access to the core components of the digital channels, I feel the insider attack is more predominant.
So basically, yes, what you mentioned is absolutely correct, Pradeep. Insider attacks are always more dangerous, because outsiders, you can, we have Prajwal who can definitely help us with, with his study, what they have seen in the market. But as we were discussing more on how to address the points what you have just mentioned are really helpful about USSD, more security bundling, about insider and outsider audits. So thank you for sharing that. So Prajwal, over to you. The same scene about insider, outsider, and the channel, because you are the one who normally go and do the audit.
Right. Yeah, Amit. So, I agree to what Tato and Pradeep, both of them, they just spoke, and I'm on with them in terms of the product and the IT aspect of it. But from a security standpoint, let me tell you something, that once you've moved into the digital platform, right, you cannot basically go and say that this particular channel is vulnerable and this is not. Just to give you a small heads up, because everything is exposed to the internet. And like I told you, right, the first thing, like if you have to basically move towards the technical aspect of it, any hacker or attacker or exploiter who's going to, exploit a particular system or gain access to your system, the first medium or the first, point of contact or where he would basically try to explore and exploit is the web, which is internet. So the moment you're exposing your particular channels to the internet, irrespective of whether it's mobile banking, internet banking, or you name it, once it's exposed, it is vulnerable. Okay. Now, what we need to do is like what Pradeep was saying in terms of measures, like in terms of the encryption aspect of it, in terms of the monitoring aspect of it, and so on and so forth. You definitely have to protect this. So at this point in time, it's going to be very difficult for me to say which channel is vulnerable, because from my perspective of understanding and auditing multiple platforms, anything which is exposed to the internet is vulnerable.
Understood.
So, okay, as security professionals, as consultants, what we're supposed to be doing is we need to, have some controls. We need to have some measures to make sure that whatever is exposed is not compromised, right? Because at the end of the day, like I told you, right, before the pandemic, let's take an example. We had people who are actually walking to the banks and doing their transactions. But as of today, because of the current situation, just imagine, right, in the entire world, do you see anybody actually moving out to a particular branch and doing any kind of banking? No. Everybody is sitting at home and doing their particular thing online. So that is where the risk is by itself. Okay. Now, coming to the insider and the outsider risk, again, very difficult to basically comment, whether it's an insider risk or an outsider risk. Because like I told you, being forensic investigators as well, and having a decade of experience and looking into the systems that are compromised, we see a lot of systems are also compromised because of an insider attack. It's not just the hackers or the exploiters or people who are basically accessing these applications. Why? Because like Pradeep rightly said, they have access to the source code, right? They have administrative privileges, so on and so forth. Now, that is why what I would say is from a risk perspective, there are 4 ways to treat a risk, right? You have treat, transfer, terminate, and tolerate. Now, if I'm an insider and if I'm a person who's developing this particular application, what I need to basically go ahead and do, I need to accept this particular risk. I definitely have my non-disclosure agreements. I will have my service level agreements and so on and so forth, where I basically sign off saying, hey, you know what? At the end of the day, I know I am, the risk owner perspective, or so on and so forth of this particular risk, and it's my responsibility. I'm accepting this particular risk. So that's why what is very important as of today is we talk about SIM. Most of them have heard about this particular term, which is Security Incident and Event Management, right? Where any action which is basically being performed by an administrator or by a person who's got access to them, that has to be monitored, so that we'll be able to go ahead and check and confirm as to where this is coming into the picture. And obviously from an external hacker perspective, like I told you, we have to protect our particular services. Like we make sure that anything exposed to the internet is in our particular demilitarized zone, which is again protected by a particular firewall. We have a web application firewall which is there, anything which is public facing, and then my internal networks are properly segmented, so on and so forth, to avoid these things. So from my perspective, just to give you a conclusion on this, Amit, coming to the channels, anything exposed to the internet, we cannot choose that what is vulnerable, and insider or outsider is also going to be difficult. So at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we safeguard our systems and implement controls so that we don't get exploited, irrespective of whether it's insider or not.
True. So thank you, Prajwal, for sharing your experience on the insider, outsider, as well as any channel which is exposed to the internet. Risks are associated with it, and that is where the role of our risk department, the role of our the IT admins, the role of our project managers comes into the picture, who monitor the system on day-to-day basis and see how the systems are behaving. So I also noticed that about internal and external or basically outsiders, as you have rightly mentioned, for outsiders we can put the system measures, right? We will not allow them the access. But for internals, as you mentioned, it's we have to make sure that the banks have to make sure they have been educated properly not to commit any of those risks. Thank you for clarifying our audience on various risks and how we can overcome on those risk measures. Can we have a second poll question?
So meanwhile the poll ends, we have questions from our audience. Let me read it out for you, Amit.
Sure.
So the question is, what is the most critical security threat on mobile? First question, and second question that Kanaraj is asking that the challenge, there is a challenge in all banking on all industry, not only banking and net. What are the measures taken to prevent internal hackers? So I'll end the poll right now.
So once the poll is done, we will take those questions. So thank you, team. So the question on the poll was on a very important aspect, that is the regulator. So now I think we spoke about about the channel, we spoke about the internal outsiders, we spoke about the solutions, the risk which are there, the regulator, the role of regulator. So I think this is also a very important aspect on when we talk about the security, when we talk about the risk on any of the services. So Tata, over to you. Have you noticed any mandates from the central bank, for compiling or offering this kind of services, and whether these factors are been considered, thoroughly or 100% by the banks when they release the services to the customer?
Thank you for the question, Amit. Yes, so from a regulatory perspective, there is a mandate. The regulator's concern really is to safeguard the customer, right? Banks, what we do as well is at the core of the customer. So we need to ensure that whatever we deliver to the customer, it's secure. So there is a mandate from the regulatory point of view. What really happens is if you've got a product, a new product, whether it's a channel or it's a service, you obviously conduct an operational risk assessment on that product to say from an operational point of view, this is how the product will work, how will it impact the customer. And then you also move on to the systems, right? You do a technology risk assessment. So you've got an ORIA, which is the operational one, you've got the technology one as well. And those are all submissions to the regulator to say, look, the regulator, I want you to approve USSD for me. However, these are the steps that I've taken to risk assess this product. Can you please approve? And obviously, with every product or every channel, there's always a risk associated to it, known or unknown, and there needs to be a mitigation around it to say, should I encounter this type of risk, this is how I will mitigate it. So in short, yes, there is a regulatory aspect, there's assessment, and we are mandated by the regulator. Obviously, if we don't meet any of those requirements, the customer will go to the regulator and say, bank did not do 1, 2, 3, and you need to account.
How do you feel, Chato? We will just continue this question. As you mentioned, banks are being mandated by the regulator, but do you feel that banks, the regulator, update themselves, or they are much more aware about what are the risks or the mandates they need to pass, or they are waiting for the mandate is passed today for the instances which happened last year or maybe last 6 months back, right? So do you feel that regulators are really putting those efforts to keep themselves up to up to the mark or up to par on what is happening?
I would say yes, but it's a very slow process, right? Obviously, we know our regulators are normally government, right? And with government, there's always the level of bureaucracy. I'll say yes, but it's a slow process, but we'll get there.
True, and I think this is same across the globe, right? I think the regulators needs to go step up, and they need to make sure that they are well ahead of such scenarios. So Pradeep, when you develop your products, when you make the strategy of your new product, so how do you consider, or do you consider the various mandates which are being issued by the local governments, so that your systems are are configured as per those mandates and the rules. So how you make sure that those are being considered as a part of your strategy?
Yes, Amit. See, that will be the guiding factor for our security principles, what we develop, right? For the each and every product which we develop, especially as it is a financial industry. And as Prajwal was rightly mentioning, right, the 300x kind of security threats we have today. So additional to what even the guidelines set by the governing bodies, we too will follow the product standards by discussing with the audit experts, right, kinds of SISA, etc., and understanding what are the real threats, etc. And when it comes to the product development, so starting from the onboarding process, right, for the digital channels, so it will start from there, wherein we will ensure that the proper AML checks are in place, right, before we onboard a customer. And these days, customers can open an account by dialing a short code. It's as simple as that, right? So we need to ensure that we we do the proper KYC of the customer also. So different ways to do it. Either you integrate with the national KYC system, or if there's no proper KYC system, you integrate with a different kind of wallet platforms or MNOs to ensure that we open account for a proper person, right? Starting from there, then when the customers start doing the transactions, right? So how do you ensure that the data which is sitting within the banking infrastructure is safeguarded, right? Example to start with, let's say customer KYC details, right? Who has access to those details and what kind of data? Then comes the digital channel access. So the pins, the OTPs, the passwords, or the card related details, or the accounts. So if there is an opportunity, we will encrypt it in one-way encryption. Or if we have to go back and check against something by decrypting, we should ensure that all those are encrypted with the latest technologies, right? For example, AES, GCM, no padding. If you speak today, that would be the latest text encryption methodology, right? And also we need to keep engaged with the latest technology and the latest encryption mechanism that is coming into the market, and we should keep improvising our product.
Correct. Right? So yeah, sure. So what you mentioned is absolutely correct. When you're doing a development, you will consider so many factors, right? Still, we see there are frauds happening, the threats to the systems. So Prajwal, based on your past experience, you must have seen these mandates from the central banks, or you must have also seen how those mandates have been followed by the banks as well as the systems. So what's your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, Amit. So like we speak, right? So that's where we come into the picture, right? Like we keep talking to a lot of payment brands, we keep talking to a lot of central banks, and from a security perspective, we keep telling them that these are things you'll have to mandate so that we can safeguard the system. Just to highlight on that particular point, right? See, no organization or no environment is risk-free. I cannot go ahead and say that I'm zero risk. That's a very, very wrong assumption, or that's false. Right? There's some amount of risk, irrespective of you have a top-notch security system. Also, there is some amount of risk which is called as residual risk, which still persists in an organization. Now, that is something that we have to accept. We don't have a choice, right? Now, coming into the mandates, right? There are a lot of mandates from the central banks, right? I think most of them on this particular forum also know this particular thing, that if you want to issue, like say for example, you want to acquire transactions with respect to Visa and MasterCard, it's a mandatory requirement that the local bodies are mandating PCI DSS as a compliance, right? Because that is something which is very, very important, because it is dealing with financial information per se, or financial transactions. Now again, why? Because these regulatory bodies are again tied up with these payment brands, and they are also getting this particular thing that okay, if we basically go ahead and implement these controls, I am in this particular assumption that my systems are safe and secure, right? But to what extent, that is something that we will have to monitor over a period of time. So definitely the banks are mandating a lot of compliances across, like in terms of the privacy aspect of it, in terms of security aspect of it, there are a lot of regulations coming into the picture. But my only take is, let's not just stick to the compliance aspect of it. See, compliance is just one aspect. Yes, I am compliant, but can we talk about security and not just compliance? Because that is where there's a small line of difference between what is compliance and what is security. Because we don't want to just go back and tick the box, right? It doesn't make any sense today. Like, you go ahead and say, okay, I have this particular, but my question is, how effective is that particular control? Are you actually monitoring that particular aspect? So that is where, my take is. Banks are definitely mandating these certain, or, your regulatory bodies are mandating certain things, but how effectively you are actually, keeping a check on that is something that I would basically say.
Sure. Thank you, Prajwal. Tato, from a bank perspective, I'll come and ask you one more question on the compliance. So as Prajwal has mentioned, as Pradeep has mentioned, various compliance, we discussed about the various mandates from the government. So what are the processes normally a bank should consider for making sure that they are following these mandates? Like we have recently seen there is a rise, we have seen in various banks that now banks are making it mandatory to have CIS, security consultant or security manager or risk department. So from your views, especially in the market where you operate, how do you see that these things are being taken seriously by the banks?
Okay, so the compliance really is an interface between the business within the bank and the regulator, right? So that's the interface between the two. So from whatever that I'm doing within the bank, it has a bearing on the overall customer. So remember, as a bank, whatever that we're doing is at the core of the customer, and it's always in the interest of the regulator to take care of the customer. Their mandate is the customer. So the compliance department acts as an interface between all the business units and the regulator. So as and when these new laws are introduced, right, your risk rating to say, if you've got a customer of this nature, these are the fields that you need to include when you onboard the customer. So so compliance ensures that indeed, from a system perspective, we've included all those fields that will actually make an assessment to say Tato is a high-risk customer, for an example, and the reporting goes all the way to the regulator. So there is that level within the bank.
Sure. Thank you, Tato. We spoke about various mandates. We spoke about the compliance. So the second thing which always comes to me is it like customer education will help us to reduce this risk? How much focus are we putting in to educate the customer? So when it comes to, I want to start this with Pradeep. When it comes to Pradeep, I think for you, the customer is the bank, right? So how do you make sure that, the training, the customer basically education is being done to make sure that, the systems are being properly managed, monitored, and these mandates are being followed?
Correct. Thanks, Amit, for that question. So usually what we do, right, when the product is deployed and before handing over to the end customers, right? So we work closely with the bank team, right, and understand their security needs, right? And also we explain them what are the security measures that product comes by default with. And most of the things which are present in the security measures, right, are configurable. Just to give an example, right, let's say the passwords expiry period, right, or the OTP expiry period, or let's say how frequently I should shoot a security question and answers for a customer, right, and how the data is sitting in the backend. So we share the whole data dictionary to them, right, and also we will educate them how the logging is happening in the platform, both the file level as well as the database, right. So we'll start with that, and also we drill down deep into such a level that we'll guide them how the transaction processing is happening, and in case if a specific exceptions or something is raised, alarmed, right, where exactly they should go and quickly check and ensure that what can be fine-tuned or tweaked quickly so that the services are up and running, right? And also the monitoring as the transaction keep evolving, right? So the monitoring tool, right, which alerts or the fraud alerting system, which alerts the customer as and when a specific use case is met. Just to give an example, let's say it's not a very normal in a day to see that Pradeep's account gets debited $100 for every now and then, right? I won't be doing more than 3 or 4 transactions in a day. or even the
Correct.
credits for that matter. So whenever the system identifies such transaction, alerting the banks, right? And also if needed, blocking the customer on the fly, and even if needed, the reversing the transaction, etc. Because once the money is out of the system, then it's very difficult for the banks even to recover such amounts.
True. So yes. So I hope that you guys also follow and make sure that the continuous customer education, basically the
Yes.
backend user education and the training goes on. So
Yes,
Chato,
yes.
from a end service provider, how important is for you guys to make sure that the customer education is being done on very frequent basis?
It's quite important for the bank to make sure that customer education is enforced, because it goes a long way, right? There's a level of liability that will sit with the customer as well, not only the bank. So it's always important at any given point for the customer to know what they should and shouldn't do, because there's, like I'm saying, there's a level of liability that will sit with them, not only the bank. But we do ensure that customers get the necessary education around every channel that they use, the importance of not sharing passwords, OTPs. It's quite important that they know the implications thereof. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. And Prajwal, I hope that from a SISA, training is very important, and you guys spend a lot of time in educating the partners as well as your customers on those aspects.
Absolutely, Amit. So see, for us, at the end of the day, all of us will agree to this point that customer is the king, correct? So
True.
at the end of the day, what is very important for all of us is to educate the particular customer. And like what Tato just communicated, that's a very good point, that the liability is with both of us. One is from a customer standpoint, one is from a solution provider standpoint as well, right? So what we can go ahead and do is we can impart knowledge to the customer, saying, okay, these are your passwords. You make sure your passwords are safe and secure. You use, passwords which are not like your name or your date of birth, so on and so forth, but use complex passwords and so on and so forth. But still, now if they are practicing it, that is not our responsibility, that is their liability, right? So we can enforce these things definitely, but then whether they are practicing it, that's why it's a joint responsibility. Like I can give you a small example, right? I just quote with a small example. All of us are so happy when we do a transaction on the ATM. Just giving you a small example. So when we transact a particular ATM and we get a receipt out of the ATM, like how many of us actually see whether that particular card number is in a masked format on the receipt, right?
True.
Like how many of us will actually go ahead and look? Like the moment we get the particular money, we are so happy that the receipt is out, we just crush that particular receipt and put it into that particular dustbin. That's about it. That's what we're doing. But how many of us know whether that particular switch is configured properly and my 16-digit card number is not provided on that particular receipt? Because PCI mandates like only first 6 and last 4. But do I actually go ahead and look into that? Now that is where customer education is important. That is where the liability is a dependency on both of them. So yes, to answer your question, it is very important from customer education perspective and so on and so forth. But the liability is a common factor between both.
True. And we have also noticed that sometime when we go to the ATM, we can see the receipt still in the printer, right? Even it has been it's not been even collected by the customer, the previous customer who has done the transaction. And as you rightly mentioned, if the data is there, it's of a big risk. I think these are the risk factors which bank needs to make sure are not being repeated and the systems are being properly configured. So before we take the questions from our audience, by the time I collect the questions from my backend team, let's have a poll question. And Ashwini, you can also share with me the other questions so that we can discuss those things as well with the panelists. Thank you,
team.
So I have got a couple of questions. There is a big list, so we'll go through some of the questions quickly from our audience. So the audience wants to know about about how to mitigate the major risk which has been from internal sources. So any suggestions on which are the core areas which a bank or a service provider should focus to reduce the risk or from the internal sources? Chato, to start with.
I believe segregation of duties will go a long way, right? So you wouldn't have one person having a 360 view of what's happening. So you rather have a level of a maker checker within your environment to ensure that there's segregation of duties.
Sure. So maker and checker. Pradeep?
Yeah, Amit, I feel the bank should know what data is coming into the system and what data is going out of the platform, right? And which are all the touch points the product is doing today. Because it's okay, it's easy for us to tell that as a digital banking solution provider, my product is safeguarded against so many threats and I am audited by the likes of SISA, etc. Right? However, when we consume the services, it means that we are sending the customer data to them, right?
Correct.
Is that channel secured enough? Or let's say some incoming transaction is coming into Modefin platform, right? How safe it is. So, as Tato rightly said, the segregation of duty is a must and should. And about that, the timely check of those segregation of duties. Example, let's say I'm in IT department today and I moved to the customer service, right? I shouldn't be having the read-only or the root database access to the digital channels, right? Because my role is limited to the customer servicing part. So timely on the roles and responsibilities, segregation of duties, and from the IT perspective, what are the touch points of the product and how the data is sitting within the system and also data on the transit. If we cover these, right, I think we will be in a good position.
Okay, so basically segregation of the duties is very important aspect to control, the internal the risk from the internal sources. Prajwal, you want to add anything?
Absolutely. So both of them have, bang on to that particular point. Access control is something which is very, very important. And that's why we primarily talk about role-based access, which is very important. And apart from that, one important factor which I would like to highlight is monitoring. Whatever actions is being performed, either by a person with root and admin, because there are people with maximum privilege in the organization, right? So these actions have to be monitored. Because monitoring is something which is very, very important, and that's where you can avoid 99% of the breach if you have an effective and intelligent threat monitoring system.
Correct. Understood.
Okay.
So basically, action can happen on SOD basis also, segregation of duties also, but still, if we have a proper monitoring, that is something which will help us to make sure that the systems are being monitored properly from all the different views. Very good. So one thing before we have just now 5 minutes with us, and because we have to do the hard stop at 4 o'clock IST. So before I quickly want to know from each of my panelists any recommendation for the best ways to address the rising risk in the digital banking. So your recommendations to all our audience on various, what are the best ways to reduce the risk? We can start with Chacho. Chacho, your recommendations. Chado? I think we lost Tato. By the time Tato joins back, Pradeep, you want to take this question? Any best recommendation you want to give?
See, it's an overall recommendation from my side.
Sure.
A time-tested product, right, and a proper infrastructure, and a well-educated bank team on the proper guidelines, right? So if we have all this in place, believe me, whatever the product the banks invest on, right, I'm pretty sure they will get a decent ROI on it, right? Sure. And if we need to speak more about each node of it, right, the product, the infra, and the bank, it will take much of the time. But if we concentrate on each and every aspect of it, drill down to the proper what do you say, to the base, right, and ensure that security guidelines and the measures are in place, the platform will be risk free.
Sure, noted. Thank you, Pradeep. Prajwal, any recommendation from your side?
Oh, absolutely.
I know you have a big list.
I can just talk about it, throughout the day, but I'll cut short in the interest of time. The first thing what is very important for all of us to understand is you see a lot of banks outsourcing their digital platform or digital channels to third parties, right? Like a lot of fintech companies are developing and all that. That's what Pradeep lightly said, that over a period of time we might do it in-house, but as of now they're trying to outsource because business is our top priority. So first very important factor is you need to have a robust vendor management system. Okay, because it's very important for you to actually go ahead and look into the risk associated with that particular vendor, so that you don't when you're doing an onboarding process, you onboard the best vendor in the market. So you need to have a robust vendor management system where you perform a good due diligence before onboarding the vendor. That is my first point. The second point, which is very important as of now to reduce the risk, is multi-factor authentication. I mean, a lot of people speak about it, in terms of that is basically, having a user ID and password, but I'm talking about another factor, which is a multi-factor authentication, so that even if your user ID and password is compromised, you do not have the second factor with you, right? Because that is an OTP which is sent to you over an as an SMS or so on and so forth to your phone, and then this keeps changing. It is not static; it's dynamic in it. Right?
Correct.
So that is another thing which I would like to highlight. And the last important point and the third point which I would like to talk about is phishing emails is something which is very, very important as of today. So you need to understand the source. Don't simply go ahead and download anything or click a link so that your information is basically compromised at the end of the day, right? And apart from that, another thing, when you're using the digital aspect of it or digital platforms, do not use public Wi-Fi's. Okay.
Very important.
These are few pointers that I can talk about on it. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Prajwal. I know you have a very big list, but that we will inform to all our audience to get in touch with with you guys and collect that list. Tato, before thank you for coming back and joining us back. The question, the thing what I want from you is, what is the your recommendation on the best way to reduce the risk on the digital banking, which you want to share with our audience?
Okay, it's quite important, like I said earlier on, before we deploy any product or services, let's make sure that we go through the operational risk assessment of that product. We understand who's going to use the product. We train those people, they know the behavior of the product end to end. The same would have to be done on the technology assessment as well. So if we are deploying this on a cloud-based solution, how does the data move from one application to the other? Then we go a step further now to say, I've got this link. Can I start running my vulnerability checks on this? Let me see all the issues from a software perspective, from an application perspective. Let me remediate, right? There's only that much that you can do. Like Prajwal rightly says, you can never say I'm 100% secure at all at no given point of time, right? You can remediate now and you run another assessment, you're going to come up with 2 or 3. But it's how now you rate those risks. Are they high? Are they medium? Are they low? Can you live with them, or what can you do to them, right?
True.
So let's just make sure that we have those checks and balances in place. Even within the organization, let's make sure that we have the segregation of duties. Tato cannot do everything. If I move, let's make sure that my rights are terminated. We have the monitoring in place. If it means that we need to use softwares like Imperva for your databases to monitor who's doing what from an admin perspective, let's have that in place. It's an investment. But it's an investment that we should be all taking, right? No matter the price, security is important. One silly mistake can cost you a license. That's it.
Thank you, Tato, for for sharing your thoughts on how to address various risks on the digital banking. We have a lot of questions what we have received from our audience. I think we are running short of time. So what we will do is we will make sure that we respond to all our audience with the response, or we'll try to get the response from our experts, and we will try to respond to them. So here I would like to thank all our audience, all our panelists to spend time with us to make sure that we have discussed on the very critical and crucial important item which is right now required during the pandemic, and due to the increase in the business in the transactions on the digital platform. and the risk which has been increasing, how to overcome those risks. Once again, I would like to thank you, Tacho, Pradeep, and Prajwal, and once again, thank you, and I think we can end the session, panel discussion here. Thanks once again to all the panelists and all the audience and my backend support team. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe and take care. Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.